When I was 12, my parents sent me to live with my uncle in the countryside. They thought I was a burden and preferred raising my twin sister, who they believed was more capable. She really was cleverer than me, and I couldn't keep up. In a family of overachievers, being average just didn't cut it. Both my parents were doctors and wanted my sister and me to follow in their footsteps, but I was more interested in creative endeavors than academics. Despite my efforts, I wasn't doing well in school. My parents didn't encourage me. Instead, they constantly compared me to my sister and insulted me. This treatment started early and worsened over time, making it hard for me to concentrate. By middle school, my grades were so poor that I was failing most classes. My teachers didn't understand what was happening at home and thought I was lazy. At school, people compared me to my brilliant sister, making things even harder. I cried myself to sleep every night as my parents praised my sister and reminded me of how disappointed they were in me. One night, after being insulted about my grades at dinner, I lashed out. My parents grounded me for 2 weeks, and I decided to run away from home without knowing where I was going. To go obviously, I couldn't get very far. I only made it to the nearby park, where I sat alone, terrified in the dark. They found me there around 5 a.m. with the help of the cops. After they brought me back home, they decided to send me to my uncle's house in the countryside. When my parents told me, I begged them not to do it. I promised I'd be better and never disappoint them again or try to run away. But they didn't care. They said I had let them down too many times and they couldn't handle it anymore. They had another child to take care of, one who wasn't useless like me. They mostly fawned over my sister, barely paying attention to me unless it was to make fun of my poor grades. I kept pleading with them not to send me away because I didn't want to be separated from my sister, the only person in the family who was nice to me. But they didn't listen. They made me say goodbye to my sister and didn't even let her come with me on the ride to my uncle's house. Once I got there, I couldn't stop crying for weeks. I just wanted to go home. I tried calling my parents, but they ignored my calls. My uncle and aunt were really supportive and understanding, but it didn't help that my parents refused to talk to me. After a few weeks, I decided to accept my fate and make peace with it. I stayed in touch with my sister in secret. She didn't have a cell phone, so I had to call her from my uncle's home phone whenever our parents were away. Social media was just getting popular, and she used the computer to talk to me occasionally. Whenever my sister would tell me the coast was clear, I'd call her and we'd finally get to talk. My sister and I are still in touch. We love each other, and that's how it's always going to be. She keeps me updated on what's going on with her and our parents. A couple of weeks ago, she told me our parents were planning to reach out to me, so I was able to prepare myself mentally. For the past 10 years, I've had no contact with my parents. Initially, they refused to get in touch with me or even speak to me after dropping me off at my uncle's house. After a couple of years there, I decided I didn't want to reach out to them either. They had abandoned me, and that was the end of it. Living with my uncle and aunt was much better. They didn't put me under the kind of pressure my parents did, and I started doing better at school. I was still an average student, not the straightest student my sister always was, but at least I wasn't flunking all my classes. My uncle and aunt also allowed me to take part in activities like school plays and sports, which my parents had forbidden because they thought it would affect my grades. I was living life to the fullest and was very happy with them. When I lived with my parents, I was also forbidden from talking to boys because they thought it would distract me. My uncle and aunt had no such ridiculous restrictions and allowed me to talk to whoever I wanted and bring friends home. Coincidentally, that's how I met my husband, who has been there for me all along. We've been together for the past 6 years, starting in high school and sticking together ever since. We even went to the same college. I graduated last year, and just a week after our graduation, we got married in an intimate ceremony. Last month, I gave birth to our son. I no longer live with my uncle and aunt. My husband and I have our own house a few streets away from them. We visit each other frequently, especially now to see our son. I'm currently on maternity leave, so I have a few more weeks before I need to go back to work. My sister and I have been openly in touch for the past few years. When she turned 18, she decided she didn't need to hide our bond from our parents anymore. She was my maid of honor at the wedding and is the godmother to my child. Last week, while visiting, she told me our parents were planning to visit me. They didn't know I was married or had a baby since everyone stopped talking to them after they abandoned me. My sister never felt it necessary to update them about my life, even when they asked. After 10 years, our parents finally seemed to feel some regret and wanted to reach out. My sister thought it was her duty to inform me so I could decide how to respond and not be caught off guard. A couple of days after her visit, my parents did reach out through social media, asking if they could visit. They didn't apologize for anything, it was just a plain message from both of them. I was a bit disappointed by their message because I expected at least an apology for how they treated me in the past. For a moment, I felt so angry that I considered not responding at all. But then I had a better idea. I decided to invite my parents over to show them how well I was doing without them. I gave them my address and invited them for dinner on the weekend. I also invited my uncle, aunt, and sister. Naturally, my husband and son would be there since we were hosting the dinner at our house. I didn't tell my uncle and aunt that my parents would be there, so everyone was surprised when they showed up last weekend. This was 3 days ago, and I still don't know if it was the right decision. Once everyone arrived, things were pretty awkward. I hadn't seen my parents in 10 years, and the whole family had cut them off, including my uncle and aunt. My parents had promised to support me financially while I lived with my uncle and to stay in touch to meet my emotional needs. They did send money every month but didn't bother to keep in touch and were just glad to be rid of me. My uncle was upset that my parents abandoned me emotionally but didn't mind taking care of me. He stood up for me and told the rest of the family what my parents were doing, leading everyone to cut them off. My dad continued to send money until I turned 18, and after that, there was no contact. After greeting each other, we were supposed to have dinner, but I decided to make a toast first. As if things weren't awkward enough, I wanted my parents to feel sorry and regretful. I got up and started making a speech about how wonderful the last 10 years of my life had been compared to the first 12. I directed my speech to my uncle and aunt because they had done so much for me over the past decade. Honestly, I don't think I would have made it this far without them. I also thanked my husband for being with me through everything and my sister for never giving up on me despite everything that happened. I deliberately snubbed my parents in my speech because I had nothing to thank them for. They noticed, keeping their eyes downcast and silent throughout my speech. After finishing my speech, I decided to rub it in even more by turning to my parents and telling them I was finally ready to introduce them to my new family. They were shocked when I announced this. My mother burst into tears and ran out. The whole situation was dramatic and heavy. After they left, we had a very awkward and quiet dinner. No one stayed for dessert, and I was glad because it felt too heavy. I didn't like my parents, but I knew I had gone too far. I haven't had a chance to speak to my uncle and aunt yet, but my sister and husband think I overstepped and should have just ignored my parents' messages if I didn't want to interact with them. They believe insulting them was unnecessary. Am I the jerk for inviting my parents over for dinner and then humiliating them? Update 1. The comments have been divided on whether I should apologize to my parents, but everyone agrees that I should talk to my uncle and aunt. Since opinions are mixed about my parents, I decided to contact my uncle today. It's been a week since the dinner, and we hadn't talked much due to being busy and the lingering awkwardness. I called my uncle and immediately apologized for inviting my parents without giving them a heads up. He admitted he was shocked, but eventually got over it. He hadn't reached out because he wasn't sure how I was feeling after that night. He agreed it was awkward, but assured me it was water under the bridge. I then called my aunt and apologized to her as well, and she had a similar reaction. Now that I've apologized to both of them, I don't feel as guilty anymore. Personally, I don't feel like I owe my parents an apology after everything they put me through in my childhood. I don't think anyone would feel sorry for how I acted. My parents haven't apologized to me, so I don't see why I should apologize. I talked to my husband about it since he thought I should apologize. I explained that even though my actions at the dinner were uncalled for, the way I was treated in the past was unacceptable too. He understood my perspective and didn't push the issue. I told my sister the same thing. She was a bit skeptical, but ultimately said it was my decision. I was the one wronged, so whatever I decided was fair. She hasn't been able to contact our parents for the past week since they've been unusually quiet. I assume they're just laying low for now, but I expect them to reach out again and possibly create some drama. Update 2. I want to clarify that my sister isn't trying to be diplomatic by maintaining a good relationship with our parents. Even if she is, I'm fine with it. Please don't make a big deal out of it in the comments. She knows what they did to me was wrong, but she was very young at the time and couldn't have done much. She kept in touch with me, and that's enough. She's still in contact with our parents because they're getting older, and she doesn't want to feel guilty for abandoning them. It's not that deep, so please don't accuse her of anything. We have a lot of love between us, and the negative comments about her are unjustified. As I mentioned in my last update, I was pretty sure my parents wouldn't take what I did kindly. They're not the type to let things go easily, so I expected some retaliation. Today, 10 days after the dinner, they went public with the incident on social media. This surprised me because they aren't usually active online, but they decided to post about this. As expected, it was a one-sided post where they only talked about how hurt they were, without mentioning anything they had done in the past. I honestly wouldn't have cared about the post if it had been directed at our family members. No one in my family likes my parents because they abandoned me. But they were clever and tagged my coworkers and my husband's coworkers, even though he had nothing to do with this fiasco. My coworkers weren't aware of my history with my parents, so they were shocked when they got tagged in the post. They started blowing up my phone almost immediately. Since I'm on maternity leave, I didn't know about the post right away because I don't check social media often. I'm usually busy with my son. When I finally saw the messages and checked the post, I was shocked and didn't know how to react. I realized my parents had probably stalked me online, finding my coworkers' accounts through pictures I had posted and tagged. They must have spent the past week figuring out who my friends at work were to ruin my reputation. After the initial shock, I decided to comment and explain the reality of the situation. I had nothing to hide. I was the victim. What happened at the dinner was uncalled for, but not unjustified. I typed out the entire story, detailing how my parents had dropped me off at my uncle's house years ago and refused to keep in touch. Even when they reached out recently, they hadn't apologized. If they had, I might have reconsidered what I said at the dinner. I also clarified the situation to my coworkers who had been tagged, apologizing on behalf of my parents because they didn't deserve to get caught up in our drama. It was ridiculous for my parents to drag them into this mess. I'm obviously very angry because my parents could have just targeted me, but dragging my coworkers into it was below the belt and unacceptable. I'm waiting for my husband to get home. I didn't want to bother my husband at work because he had an important client meeting. Otherwise, I might have contacted him about this. Honestly, it's just petty drama, and I can handle it on my own. I've already spoken to my sister, and she thinks our parents are acting crazy. They probably couldn't handle the disrespect and completely lost it. Even so, nothing justifies their behavior. I haven't told my uncle or aunt because I'm sure they'll have strong reactions, and I don't want to trouble them since they're busy with work. Update 3. A few hours have passed since my last update. It's 8 p.m. now, and everyone is at my house. My uncle, aunt, sister, and my husband, who's back from work. We're trying to figure out how to deal with this situation. I don't want to go to a lawyer like some of you suggested. I don't have the time or energy for a legal battle. I prefer to handle this personally and keep lawyers out of it as long as possible. If my parents refuse to take down the post, I might have to contact an attorney and file a defamation lawsuit or whatever is appropriate. For now, we're trying our best to have them remove it. So far, we've all texted them, asking them to take it down, but they haven't responded or cared. At least they haven't deleted my comment, so everyone who sees the post will also see the truth. Unfortunately, the post is gaining traction, which isn't good for me. It's not just my coworkers who have seen it, but also some acquaintances who are now asking me about it. I don't know how it showed up on their feeds, probably because I was tagged in the post, but I've removed the tag and it's still showing up. There must be a glitch with the app, but it's frustrating. People are asking me about it, and I'm tired of answering their questions. They could just read my comment, but for some reason, they feel the need to reach out to me personally. People keep asking me about it repeatedly, and it's getting really annoying. I just want this to blow over. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that HR doesn't contact me because that could spell trouble. I really don't want to ruin my reputation at work because of my parents. Right now, my family and I are trying to figure out a way to get them to take the post down, but they're not responding. Tomorrow, my sister is going to visit my parents and ask them to take it down in person. If they still refuse, we'll have no other option but to get a lawyer involved. I really hope it doesn't come to that because it would be a lot of work. I just want to spend time with my son during my maternity leave, not deal with their shenanigans. Update 4. My sister visited my parents today for an hour. She told me they were very upset, which is why they made the post and tagged my coworkers. As I guessed, they found my coworkers' social media accounts by stalking me online. That's creepy, but it's the least of my concerns right now. She had a long discussion with them, and they said they would take the post down if I apologized first. I told my sister that's a no from me because I didn't do anything wrong. Thankfully, she knew I wouldn't apologize and told my parents I wouldn't pretend to be sorry for something I didn't do. She warned them that if they didn't take the post down, we'd get a lawyer involved. After almost an hour of discussion, my parents decided to take the post down. However, they also told my sister to tell me that they are cutting me out of their lives and inheritance. I don't care about any of that. I just want the post taken down. They can keep their inheritance. It holds no importance to me. My husband and I are doing well in our careers, and we know we're on track to be successful. Even if we don't become rich, I'm fine with that because at least I don't have to rely on my parents for money. My sister also made sure to tell them how I feel about this so they're aware. Now that this situation is dealt with, I'm going to focus on enjoying the rest of my maternity leave with my son. I want to make the most of this time before I go back to work. Thank you all so much for the support you've shown me.